everybody, and welcome back to Tax Sale Insiders. As always, we are a podcast set up for successful tax lien and tax deed investing. And I'm excited to be back again here with Brian Seidensticker, who is our CEO. Hey, Brian.
Hey. Hi, Rachel. Thanks for having me. I seem to be on here quite a bit. Hopefully people aren't sick of hearing me yet anyway, huh?
Well, they don't seem to be. They keep coming back. So that's a good anyway, thanks for being here. As if you don't know me, I am Rachel Seidensticker, and I am the COO over here, and I help put together our little podcast. Anyway, Bri, we're gonna dig right in and again tackle a state today, and we're gonna specifically talk about Michigan. Michigan seems to be out there, in a lot of ways, but I think it is one of those kind of hot areas for tax deed investing. So can you give us just a brief overview of what you know concerning tax sale investing in Michigan, what it's all about?
What's it all about? You got to know by now, ask a broad question like that, I might be talking a while, but I'll talk about a little history that I know of, right? And these dates probably aren't exact, but Michigan, is now a deed state, but actually used to be a lien state. There was I'd say lobbyist or there was definitely a movement. I think it was in the late 90s, and to the argument, right, that was being pushed was that lien investors come in, they buy the liens on the property, they really aren't interested in owning the real estate, and if they end up with any REO, the REO just sits there and rot. Now my guess is, maybe it was a very small investor, one group that might have done that, right? But all you need is one bad egg, right? And especially in this industry, the press can get a hold of that and make the bad guy out of the tax lien guy. I'm sure there was a lot more to the story, right? This is kind of when the blight in the Midwest was, pretty high, and there was all sorts of problems that were totally unrelated to tax sales. But I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. The lobbyist activity or the legislative change was approved, and essentially they turned Michigan from a tax lien state to a solely tax deed state. They have no tax lien sales anymore. I'll say overnight. And that's what they've continued to have, through today is the tax deed sales. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Okay. They settled into their deed world, huh? So
yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, how about, I guess, comment to why Tax Sale Resources, what our experience is in Michigan specifically.
Well, I think, and Michigan's not the only one like this, right? We're a nationwide company. The only one doing what we do on a nationwide basis that we know of anyway. We've been covering, Michigan really since inception, 2010. I think probably the most unique thing that we have is we have very good success collecting results data in Michigan as well. So not only do we have what's coming up for auction and the data there, but you can actually look at what sold, last year or previous, years and see what stuff has been selling for historically, right? And Michigan is one of them, but in many states we have that data available, and that's really a game changer because it allows investors to, do a whole analysis of a market without doing it the old school way. And the old school way was, hey, I want to go try to buy some properties, right? I'm going to go to an auction. I'm going to try to buy properties or buy properties, and they call test out the market, right? And that was how it's done, and it's still done that way by many investors. But the reality is you can do that test using data now, and that's extremely less expensive and a whole lot faster and easier than actually coordinating, attending auctions and placing money to see what works and what doesn't. So I think that puts us in a pretty unique category compared to really anybody else.
Awesome. Well, we'll circle back around to that for sure, and probably show folks our market analysis as well. So I guess we touched on how the evolution of Michigan from the lien state to the deed state, which is, why some people get a little bit confused. But when are the tax deed auctions held in Michigan specifically?
Well, they're, I'll say latter half of the year. I think they're mid-August through mid-November-ish timeframe. And, counties can have the sale at a different time within that time frame every year. So, but you can bet that pre-July, you don't have to, worry about getting them on your calendar. And I think after mid-November, you don't have to worry about them getting on your calendar either. So, but between July and November, definitely want to monitor, counties or monitor taxable resources, right? We'll make it easy for you.
Yeah.
If Michigan is a market you want to go, to my knowledge, most counties have at least one auction. I think in some years, Wayne County might have 2 auctions, but I think that's the exception, not the norm.
Okay. And when you, as an investor, say you're a new investor on the block, what would I expect? What should I expect when that tax auction is coming up? What kind of environment is it for a tax buyer?
Well, it was headed this way before COVID, but it certainly has solidified post-COVID of being an online state. I think there's only a county or 2 that are left, having live auctions, but the environment, like you'd want to know, for live auctions, like, I'll say Georgia, it's going to be on the auction steps. There's going to be a bunch of people around. The mortgage foreclosures are going on at the same time. It's kind of a wild atmosphere. It's interesting versus, the online platform is, not basically similar to any other online auction platform and environment. So you just make sure you get registered, make sure you place your deposits, look at the timeline, right? Do all those things like you normally would with an online platform, but you don't have to prepare for anything crazy like you would for other live auctions anymore.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Well, let's get into some of the, I guess, more of the nitty gritty on the tax sale properties, just that, getting down at a different level. Maybe looking at our market analysis report and deciding, what kind of properties are usually being offered at tax sales in Michigan. So I'm going to bring this up for our viewers. Unfortunately, if this is on the podcast, I apologize because I know that you won't be able to see, but we'll try to describe what we're doing here. But basically in our market analysis, that allows you to kind of look at a lot of different things. So let's just break it down first, Brian, on the first part of our market analysis and what we can show them in Michigan specifically.
Yeah, I think it's if you're after a certain type of asset, you can go in here. You can select Michigan, narrow it down. You can it's kind of broken into sections, right? First section is how many properties are sold. In those big buckets being like single family residential, commercial, industrial, on down to vacant land, right? And so some markets have a lot more vacant land. Some markets may have more residential, right? So depending on what you're looking for, you can at least narrow down the markets that have the product you're typically searching for, right? Kind of the next major section is, let's say you now have narrowed down to residential, right? Now you can see what stuff is selling for, and it's basically sale price versus assessed value, right? So are there certain markets that are more competitive than others, from an assessed value standpoint? And so that helps you kind of narrow down, okay, if you've picked, right, the top 20 counties with volume, right, of those 20 counties, which ones maybe you can get better deals in. And then we do that for each of the different property types, right? Commercial, industrial, et cetera. And really the last section on page 3, which is basically just giving you an idea of competition. So things like how many are online auctions versus live auctions, because I can tell you, live auctions, you get better deals at all day long, looking at data to back that up. Other things such as how many parcels were advertised versus how many sold. And there's certainly some markets where very little redeems. I've seen it. And then, for those that made it to auction and sold, how many, unique bidders were there, right? So you can get an idea of, okay, was there 1,000 properties sold and, 500 bidders, right? Or is there 1,000 properties sold and maybe 10 successful bidders, right? So you can get an idea of competition based on all that data, and really helps you narrow down. Michigan's not a small state. It's got a bunch of counties. There's no way, well, I guess you could theoretically try to attend every auction since they're online. But it's better to pick a few primary markets. And if you want help picking those primary markets, this is the data that helps you do that.
Well, I think that this last piece showing Wayne County having 899 total bidders in last year's sale compared to most of the other counties have less than 5. So that
Right.
gives you a pretty big indication, but also the number of parcels sold in Wayne is thousands more literally than any other county as well. So that's a piece to always remember. You might have more to choose from, but you always have more competition at the same time. So
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Well, thanks for that explanation. I think that's great. Are there any specific things to be aware of in the state of Michigan, any environmental problems or anything that investors should just kind of keep in mind that is different from maybe other places in the country?
Nothing crazy, that it's a huge, pothole. I think in general, getting title insurance in Michigan is a little easier. The biggest thing you deal with in Michigan in some areas is the water escrow. And I'd say, blight. Blight and folks, going into vacant properties and, stealing the copper and creating issues, right? And that happens everywhere. It just seems to be a little more prominent in the Midwest, seems like. But no crazy gotchas that I'm sure they're there, right? So definitely talk to an attorney, familiar in Michigan before you go to an auction and see what their opinion is. But overall, it's a fairly friendly state for investors, relatively speaking.
Okay. Well, I think that leads us right into our pros, knowing that it's, definitely more on the friendly side. Does that mean that counties are usually willing to work with investors pretty well in Michigan as well?
Yeah, and I haven't bought in every county, but in general, I think the process is such, and the counties have an opinion to where the tax sale investors are helping the community, not hurting the community, and so they haven't implemented any sort of crazy rules to try and take advantage of tax sale investors, and so there's definitely some positives. I think if you can get comfortable. Which I guess I live in Ohio, so I'm more comfortable with that type of market, right? And there's where you can get great deals, and you don't have crazy competition, and Michigan is less sought after than states like I'll use Florida, right? Deed investors active in Florida, if they're new, I've probably gone to a couple auctions and go, holy moly, like people are buying, properties at tax deed auctions for market value or more. Like I can't find a deal here. And in most places in Florida, they're right? Versus Michigan, right? There's a lot of competition in Wayne, but you get out of Wayne County and you find kind of those secondary or tertiary markets, you can still find really great deals.
Okay. Any other great pros to Michigan specifically?
Well, it's, only because I've looked at the market analysis report. If you're after single family homes, volume wise, there's significantly more volume of those in Michigan than many states. And I think a lot of that is because of Wayne County, which is Detroit, and going back to, at its peak in, I want to say 2012, 2013, right, they had 110,000 delinquent properties on their, delinquent tax properties on their tax roll, that they had to figure out how to get back, performing, right? So they can get the revenue from that to pay for everything. And so, because of that, they've had a massive quantity of single family homes or residential homes compared to most places in the country. And so if that's what you're after, it's definitely a unique market from that perspective for sure.
Okay. That's an interesting, just, I guess that is different than other places, because we usually talk about vacant land, which, there's definitely vacant land there and it's good. But Yeah. Interesting perspective. Any cons, any wary, thing that investors should be wary of when entering the Michigan market?
I guess this isn't unique to Michigan by any means, but if the property is vacant, and just keep this in mind for any property, where things can freeze, right? There is a decent chance that pipes have frozen and there's going to be damage, right? So take that into account when you're looking at a property and assuming what that remodel expense is going to be. Chances are it did have an issue with busted pipes due to freezing weather at some point in its delinquent tax history. Again, that's not just Michigan. That's anywhere north of, I'll say, Kentucky that freezes. Well, I should take that back, because you go west. Yeah, I hear about Texas and their ice storms. So anywhere that freezes, you can have that problem, right?
Be careful.
Yeah.
I know this is like crazy, but because is flooding? Is there any oddness to Michigan in that way versus other areas? I just feel like I think of Michigan, I think water. So I didn't know if that was.
Well, there's a lot of coastline. I don't remember how many miles of coastline, but there's a ton of coastline in Michigan. Now, do you worry about flooding, which is a piece of data that we have and you need to, worry about in other states as much in Michigan? No, but, we have the data there, right? So it doesn't hurt to double check that in the flood environmental data, section. So there's nothing unique necessarily from a flood perspective, but it never hurts to at least look at it.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll move on. So let's talk about when researching, the Michigan tax auctions and the properties within those auctions. Maybe you can walk people through just what it looks like to get into research compared to the raw file that the counties put out there, right? They put out this I'm going to share my screen again, Brian, here, but
okay.
They put out a pretty decent looking Excel file, right? So you've got this information, but do you feel like this paints a whole picture?
Well, that's a kind of a loaded question, right?
I
guess
know, sorry.
The nice thing about Michigan is most of their sales are done through the same platform. They do have a nice Excel versions, right? So if you like doing research the old school way, I'll say using just the data on the Excel sheet is not recommended, right? There's not much there. The nice thing is it is at least in Excel. It's not a scanned newspaper like some other areas that we deal with. But you can take that and look up properties the old school way. You can certainly do that. It's a little easier because they've at least made the Excel portion of your life easier. But it's, if you pull up, what you're looking at on a spreadsheet there versus what you get through the research platform, right, is, you can get it all real quick. You can get all more data than what the assessor typically has, and allows you to sift through, the whole state or all the auctions coming up real quickly to find the auctions that have the properties that you're specifically looking for. So there's definitely advantage of using the platform, by far, compared to just using the data on the raw list that the county provides through the auction site.
Great. I just kind of brought up Wayne County since you've mentioned a few times. That's Detroit, obviously the largest auction in the state, but also a significantly larger deed auction. I want to make sure I'm clear, but a deed auction in the country, because most deed auctions, don't run in the thousands of parcels on the list. They usually run closer to the hundreds. So
Right.
Although I will say that if we look back just really fast on Michigan as a whole and looking at Wayne, Brian, I thought this was an interesting stat to look at that. I'm just going to bring it up because I'm showing everybody here. The sale itself in Michigan, like you were talking about, has a much, it's decreased in size significantly over the years. So obviously that blight kind of issue that you were talking about has been, I would say, not resolved, right, but has certainly been reduced pretty significantly for,
Yeah, and I'd say it's not gone, but for anybody scared of Detroit because of the the urban myths, if you will, that maybe were reality 20, 30 years ago. I was just in Detroit 3 weeks ago, and the city itself it's amazing what the city has done. If I guess you want to track that to the quantity of delinquent tax properties from, they had 110,000, they couldn't sell those all in one, right? So they've been selling those through the years, and last I heard it was down under 30,000 that they were dealing with, and the price per property, right, and this is kind of hindsight's 2020, right, the price per single family home in mid 2000s you could probably buy for $5,000, $2,500 to $5,000 a property, which is insane. Now that same property is going for 30, 35, right, 40, which is still seems very inexpensive or cheap, right, compared to many parts of the country. But when you've got so much inventory, right, it doesn't mean that you're going to buy that property for 30 and sell it for 500,000, the next month, right? That $30,000 property might be worth 45, 50, right? So there's still many deals there, but they've done an amazing job turning that city around for sure.
Yeah. It just looks like, they've been trying to sell them in 2,000 parcel chunks, and we're down to more like 12 to 1,500 chunks. So, must be getting down anyway. And just a really quick, I guess I'm showing everybody, the looking at the data and being able to see, accurate information, within the parcel data itself. Obviously, this is a lot more information than you're going to get on this raw that the county puts out there for you. Although a clean Excel, like Brian mentioned, the platform certainly is going to give you a lot of the valuation information, the where it's located, the actual characteristics of the property, and so on. So I feel like that's important information to take note. And of course, Brian mentioned, or we talked about, this flood risk, and that's part of this information as well. So great, Brian. Well, I think do you have any specific kind of talking points about our financing product and how that applies to the state of Michigan that might be different for other states, from other states?
Well, the product itself was initially, created for Texas and Georgia, and that redeemable deed, type of process in those states. But it is certainly adaptable to, states, and I can actively work with folks in Michigan. Technically, we're not a lender, right? We don't act as a lender. It's a form of a capital partnership. But we're comfortable working in Michigan. Doesn't scare us, and like working with properties and investors in Michigan. So if it's something that you want to dive into Michigan, or actively in Michigan already, and looking for a capital partner to do that, we definitely want to talk to you.
Great. Any specific kind of terms or structure that is different, or do you want to speak to our kind of structure and terms for our capital partnership deals?
No, there's nothing different to Michigan versus anywhere else. It's the same, refinancing, or a larger line of credit structure that we have available really anywhere else, right? So it's, you either go to the auction, the refinancing, go to the auction, buy the property, come to us. As long as you bought it correctly, we give you 100% of your purchase price back, saying go do it again. We want to do it with you as many times as possible. So allows you to kind of leverage the capital. If you are limited by capital, allows you to utilize it over and over and over again. Really, it does have a limit, but typically 10 times whatever capital you have available. The other end of the spectrum would be the line of credit structure. So if you are doing this on a larger scale, we can put it together, what acts like a line of credit anyway, where we're a partner, and you can go to the auction with our capital, right? And those are, Those are for, larger investors looking to place $1 to $10 million, through the tax sales. And again, neither one of those programs are only for Michigan. That's just in general what our two programs are all about. They certainly, we're active in Michigan and like to work with investors in Michigan.
Great. Any success stories that you know of in Michigan specifically?
Well, we've worked with a lot of the folks that have bought, the properties in Detroit, and I think the standard model there has been, I don't know if it'll always be this way, but buying the properties, doing some remodeling and turning them into rentals. And from a cap rate perspective, it's a very good market for that model. I think it's becoming more competitive than it used to be 5 years ago, but I think it's still better. Well, I can tell you it's still immensely better than many markets, major metro areas. If that's something that you're looking to do, then looking at, at least Detroit in that metro area is somewhere I would suggest looking at in more detail.
Okay. So I guess to close it up today, we still have Tyler versus Hennepin on the brain, but not just Tyler versus Hennepin, but just any future things that Michigan is facing. Are there legal considerations that our investors should be taking in mind? What are some trends? Are there ramifications from Tyler versus Hennepin? I'm laying a lot on you, so I guess we'll start there and see if there's anything left. But yeah.
Well, I think I am not aware of any statute changes coming down the pipeline. Now, having said that Tyler Hennepin. Well, I'll take a step back. Before Tyler Hennepin, Michigan was a state where basically the way the bidding is a bid up, right? The bidding starts in 2000. People are bidding up, right, and creating this excess overage amount that is in excess of what the taxes were due. Now, prior to a few years ago, actually, I think it might have been as recent as last year, the county kept the excess proceeds. That was just the process. Now, before Tyler Hennepin, because Tyler Hennepin addresses this as well, the state Supreme Court in Michigan had come down and said that's not constitutional per the state constitution, and so the county can't keep those excess funds anymore. They need to make that available to the previous homeowner, right? They should have access to that equity that was created. Now, the counties didn't just keel over and say, okay, here's, this has been a revenue source for the counties for many years. So they had taken a case, I think it was set to be at least reviewed by the U.S. Supreme Court at some point. And then this Tyler Hennepin, which actually started in Minnesota, so not even related to Michigan, but the Tyler Hennepin case, was similar in the fact that it was addressing counties keeping the excess funds. And the Supreme Court said that is unconstitutional per the U.S. Constitution as well. So now, and basically, I believe told, again, I'm not an attorney, but the expectation is they would basically reject reviewing that court case in Michigan and basically told the counties that they need to adhere to what the state Supreme Court had stated. So what does that mean? Well, for the tax sale investors, right, it doesn't mean a whole lot, right? But it does mean that, for anybody that's in the overage business, Michigan was a state that you couldn't go get that overage, and now that's a state that you can, right? I don't know if you can today, right? I think there's some processes and legislation that needs to be put in place to lay out what those ground rules are, but that if it's not already, that state is coming into that realm. So I guess long story short, Tyler Hennepin doesn't affect Michigan specifically other than upholding what the state Supreme Court had already decided in Michigan. And in my view, it made the right decision, quite frankly.
Okay. Any other interesting trends coming down the pike in Michigan?
No, none that I'm specifically aware of in Michigan. Okay. I think the biggest thing is if you're an overage, and it's not really investor, but if you're in the overage or excess funds business, then keep a lookout for Michigan being a state that you probably avoided in the past because the statutes didn't support you being able to operate there, and now they will if they don't already.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and you mentioned an attorney. I think it's always good for us to certainly put a big disclaimer out there. We are not attorneys. Taxel Resources is very careful. We're trying to give you the information that we have gleaned and learned, but we certainly always recommend you seek your own counsel in that state specifically, who knows what they're talking about in each state, because every state is different, isn't it, Brian? So
yes. Don't ask your attorney in Texas to give you legal advice on how tax sale works in Michigan. And don't just call up, a local real estate attorney in Michigan and say, hey, I've got some questions about tax sales. Ask around until you find an attorney that is familiar with the tax sales in Michigan, and definitely run the questions by them. Like I said, we're not attorneys. You need to talk to one if you're not already active in Michigan. But that should always be a part of your process moving into a new state.
It should be. That was a good one to stay. Well, thank you so much, Brian. Is there any, I guess, last little bits of knowledge you want to share concerning the deed sales in Michigan before we say goodbye?
Nope. I think we covered it pretty well. I appreciate having me again. Hopefully everybody found this useful. And if anybody looking at Michigan, good luck. If you have any questions, give us a call.
Yeah, definitely. Reach out. Of course, you can find us on taxsaleresources.com. You can reach us at support@taxsaleresources.com. So thanks, Brian, so much for popping on and giving everyone a little bit of insight into Michigan. Happy investing out there. Take care.
Good luck, everybody.